Chapter 61. A battle drill with the 6th training ground. Bayan had already heard the rumors about it. The story originated from a pub 2 months before, but he shrugged it off as a groundless rumor since nothing happened since then. Yet he was told it was tomorrow. Tomorrow. Bayan thought he had a problem with his ears. Because it was simply unimaginable that he would have actually heard that. Instructor. MHM. Did you just say it was tomorrow? MHM. Stop copying Runan. Please tell me clearly. Is it really tomorrow? Arg. I told you, yes. Rimmer nodded immediately. His shameless face deserved a beating. It's not just a spar, but an all-out war. Yet it's tomorrow? Since there's not that many people involved, you should consider it as a local war instead of an all-out war. You know that's not what I'm talking about. Bayan stomped on the ground. Tomorrow is the day of the battle, and you just told us about it now. How could you even do that? Was the rumor from the pub really true? Oh, so you knew about it. That story was about me and Metin. God damn it. One-on-one spars would have been a different story, but an all-out battle was a competition of pride. Announcing such an important matter the day before was so preposterous that he couldn't close his mouth. HAAA, that's why you're called novices. Rimmer clicked his tongue, squatting on the ground. Does a war or a battle start after politely greeting each other with a nice to meet you? We will start fighting you. Be careful. No, it doesn't. Most battles start suddenly, from an unexpected situation. His sharp pressure overwhelmed the surroundings, despite his shabby posture. Once a war starts, you have to run out to participate whether you are eating, sleeping, or taking a shit. In a situation where you don't even know who the enemies are or how many of them there are, you have to draw your sword and fight. I'm giving you plenty of time to prepare by telling you a day before. That's... Bayan and the trainees shut their mouths, unable to retort. He's right. Raon nodded. Most missions are sudden. Assassination was the same. Naturally, assassination was a lot more likely to succeed when the target was outside, rather than in their home. Devising a plan and starting to move once the target left the house was a common occurrence. Improvising a plan of action was an indispensable quality of an assassin. Moreover, the 6th training ground was also informed last night. That's not much different from you. Why you should have said that earlier. You got angry before I even explained. It was my first time seeing you that angry. Rimmer giggled. Ugh. I'm sorry. Bayan lowered his head, ears completely red. It looked like he was embarrassed. Since I think everyone understands now, I'm going to start the explanation. Rimmer stood up, his hands behind his back. It seemed like he was trying to look dignified, but he didn't really. The battle starts tomorrow at 6 a.m. The 43 of us will be participating, and they will have 60 people. The victory is... By the way, why are there 60 of them? That's almost 1.5 times our numbers. The trainees' throats tightened upon hearing that the 6th training ground had a lot more people. I told you already. A war isn't something you fight with equal numbers. Are you going to complain once you meet a more numerous enemy? Say that it was unfair for you? You aren't. Ugh. That's true, but... The trainees tilted their heads and went back to their positions. They felt like they were being played by Rimmer. I'm going to start explaining again. The 43 of us and the 60 of them will start moving at the same time. The victory goes to the team that incapacitates all the enemies or seizes the flag in the opposite camp. It's simpler than spars in some ways. Murmuring that it was too easy, he told them to be thankful that he didn't tell them about it the next morning. Now that I think about it, it doesn't seem too hard. Well, I guess. Since the 6th training grounds trainees are mostly the dropouts from here, there's no members of the direct line among them either. Didn't you know? Sir Keen joined the 6th training ground a few months ago. Sir K. Keen Zieghart is a whole 2 years older than us. How can we win against him? It's fine. He was seriously injured and was bedridden for an entire year. I don't think he's even fully recovered yet. Oh, then that's a different story. The trainees breathed a sigh of relief, hearing that he hadn't completely recovered yet. That's not true. Banin shook his head. Keen Sieghart has already fully recovered from his injuries. Because he continued training his aura and senses, his might is currently at that of an advanced level sword user. A advanced level sword user? The trainees' faces went pale upon hearing it. Oof. So what? Chicken out if you are scared. I'll take care of the keen guy or whatever. I'm not scared. I'm just telling them the information. And you can't do it alone. Ha! The trainees' pale faces recovered upon seeing Martha and Bayan's argument. We also have Sir Bayan, Lady Martha, and Lady Runan. Well, we also have Raon. Honestly, I feel like we are going to win without too much difficulty. Those two can handle Sir Keen, and we can deal with the rest. We can do it. We've won against the Owen Kingdom's knights, and we've also completed a mission. The trainees smiled, saying that the 6th Training Grounds trainees were a piece of cake. You'll pay dearly if you look down on them too much. Rimmer smiled frighteningly. There's a training called Hell Week that highly improves the swordsman's abilities. The 6th Training Grounds trainees have completed Hell Week without a single dropout. And that was thanks to you guys. Thanks to us? Because the 5th Training Ground has been getting the most attention from the house. Their eyes are blazing with the desire to catch up to you. If you look down on them, then you will just end up losing before doing anything. He was seriously advising them after a long time. No way. Every day has been a hell week for us. They are dropouts from here. They can't have gotten that strong. We are born with different talents, after all. That's right. We've never lost or failed so far. As long as Sir Keen is stopped, we can win for sure. The trainees didn't lose their arrogance despite hearing his advice. They looked even more motivated, instead. That's some nice confidence. Rimmer smirked and nodded. His smile seemed to say that he didn't care if they ended up losing like that. Finally, the all-out war is like a small warfare. Which means that the leader's orders are of primordial importance. Everyone should follow Raon's advice tomorrow. Yes. Yes. Understood. The trainees that usually followed Raon answered immediately, and those who followed Bayan or Runan responded a little bit later. That's annoying. Raon frowned. Defeating the 6th Training Ground wasn't a big deal, but controlling the trainees was bothersome. Today's training is free. You can create a plan here or just keep training to prepare for the incoming battle. Rimmer returned with the usual light and loafing atmosphere. Head instructor, you didn't tell us the most important thing. Bayan raised his hand. What is it? Where is the battle going to take place? Ah, that. Rimmer clapped his hands. The northern grave mountain over there, behind the main building. He gave a sly smile to Raon. It felt like he was saying, you know the northern grave mountain well enough, I'll leave the rest to you. Ha! Raon shook his head. It looked like Rimmer had bet on their side's victory. Betting on the 5th Training Ground after creating the worst circumstance for them, he really was a funny man, or rather, elf. That's why he gets ruined every time. There was a reason he was losing money in gambling houses or racetracks all the time. I'll be going then. Rimmer waved his hand like a kid on a picnic and left the training ground. Line up. Raon sighed and gathered the trainees at the center. We are going to devise a plan now, in preparation for the team battle tomorrow. Anyone have information about the 6th Training Ground? I know a bit about them. Dorian, who had hand tremor syndrome, gulped. As everybody knows, the current top trainee of the 6th Training Ground is Sir Keen Sieghart. He is 16 years old, which is 2 years older than us, but he'd been bedridden for an entire year from a serious injury he got on a mission. He has recovered. Injury, huh? Like you heard before, his might is at the level of an advanced level sword user, and he is rather popular since every trainee in the 6th Training Ground follows him. There are 3 collaterals that are exceptionally strong. As expected of someone that had lots of connections, he kept telling them about the 6th training ground. I guess we don't even need a plan if that's all they have. I knew it. We can ignore the rest except for Sir Keen. That's right. 2 people among the 4 strongest should deal with Sir Keen, and we can wipe out the rest. The trainees giggled and clamored that they didn't even need a plan. Certainly, we are going to win without much difficulty as long as Sir Keen is dealt with. Bayan also suggested moving individually. It seemed he also didn't think they could lose. Fuck the plan. There's no need to wreck your brain over it when you can just crush them with power. Just leave it to me and I'll wipe them all out on my own. Martha raised her clenched fist. It seemed they wanted to display their abilities in the upcoming battle, since they hadn't done anything in the mission 2 months ago. After hearing everyone's opinion, Raon nodded. To summarize, since we are a lot stronger than them, we don't need anything like a plan or a strategy. We can just wipe them out. We just need to deal with Keen somehow, am I right? Yes. We are going to win regardless. Let's finish it in the morning so we can eat lunch afterwards. The trainees smiled as if they'd already won. The only silent ones were Renan like always, and Dorian who'd finished saying everything he'd wanted. Alright, let's do that. After looking around the trainees, he nodded. Oh, that's cool for once. Then is it time for the personal training? Let's make a bet about how many people you are going to defeat tomorrow. The trainees moved out for the individual training while laughing. What a bunch of idiots. Indeed. Raon nodded with a cold gaze. They don't realize at all how scary the people who are chasing after them are. It looked like they'd only learn after paying dearly for it, just like Rimmer had mentioned. 6th training ground. The same day, around 100 trainees, covered in dust from head to toe, were gathered at the center. Every single one of you has completed Hell Week, which has more than a 70% dropout rate. The trainees straightened their backs when they heard the 6th training ground's head instructor's dignified voice. And that was your choice. Do you remember the reason why? It's because of the 5th training ground. The trainees shouted at once. The voice was loud enough to shake the 6th training ground, which was bigger than the 5th training ground. That's right. The 5th training ground has been getting the most attention from the house, and the Owen Kingdom that looked down on you requested a spar with them. Your choice was made in order to defeat them. Metin examined the trainees one by one. His eyes were stronger than ever. And the time has come. After all the time you've spent getting no attention whatsoever, you finally got the opportunity to defeat the 5th training ground. As his voice resounded throughout the training ground, the trainees' eyes shone. Even if it's a 43 versus 60 battle, everyone in the house will expect their victory. However, I believe the odds are even. Show them what you've been accumulating so far. Yes. The trainees shouted their throats off. Keen Zighart. Metin called the only member of the direct line in the 6th training ground forward. A blonde, blue-eyed boy that was standing at the center stepped up. I'll leave it to you. Consider it done. Keen bowed confidently. I'll show everyone that the 6th training ground is stronger than the 5th training ground. That's not all. Metin shook his head slightly. As the 6th training ground's top trainee, you have to defeat Raon Zighart, who is the 5th training ground's top trainee. Are you not confident? Yes, I am. Keen's eyes glowed fiercely. I just didn't answer since it was obvious. That guy can't win against me. I am stronger than him. That's great confidence. Metin nodded in satisfaction. Keen isn't the only one. Everyone should do their best, so their efforts so far won't be in vain. Yes. The light didn't turn off until late at night in the 6th training ground. Raon nodded, reading the Northern Grave Mountains map, checking out the location the battle was going to take place. I know all of those places. Since he'd been training by running around the mountain ever since he followed Rimmer there, he was well aware of the geography. He had a huge geographic advantage compared to the 6th training ground. However, the others were in a bad state. The trainees were too carried away by their continued victories and successes. Even though some of that stuff was achieved by Raon alone, the trainees mistakenly believed that they'd gotten stronger by having been with him. Well, they are strong. It was a fact that the trainees were stronger than the other swordsmen or knights of their age, thanks to Rimmer's training method. However, the difference wasn't overwhelming, and they couldn't afford to look down on others. Since children grow up quickly when they are unnoticed, if they were careless, they could end up losing. All that's because they have never experienced actual battle. They will only learn after getting almost killed by someone weaker than them. Wrath sneered, realizing Raon's line of thoughts. Those idiots remind me of Devil Dom back then. The King of Essence plucked out the horns of a high devil that was acting arrogantly. Ah, there he goes again. The King of Essence is telling you a story that will become your flesh and blood, yet you interrupt me. Yes, yes. Arf. Raon Zighart. Raon shook his hand and laid on his bed. He blocked his hearing and closed his eyes. Well, he wasn't wrong. Teaching them that they weren't actually special by letting them experience defeat wasn't too bad. Rimmer must have been aiming for that, too. Of course, he must have wanted them to win after almost losing, instead of actually losing. Interesting. Raon smiled lightly. It's a good opportunity. It was an opportunity to show the trainees that didn't follow him yet what kind of role a leader could play. After the battle, every single trainee in the 5th training ground would follow his orders without exception. Then let's steal some information for now. Raon's eyes shone faintly, like the moon in the sky. On the mountainside of the northern Grave Mountain, the next day, Keen Zighart and the 59 trainees from the 6th training ground were gathered around a yellow flag. Lastly, I'll tell you the plan. Looking at the northern Grave Mountains map, Keen spoke in a sharp voice. The 5th training ground trainees are located in the west. They are still not united. Raon, Bian, Runan, and Martha are separated into 4 factions. He was aware of the fact that the 5th training ground's trainees weren't united. I'm sure they will move separately. Martha is going to rush in on her own, especially. Done. Yes. At Keen's call, a trainee with a big build that was standing next to him nodded. As we've practiced, stop her in with the first group. If you induce her into a fight of endurance by alternating her opponents, you can win. Understood. Bian uses sharp and systematic swordsmanship. Decal. Yes. A trainee with long arms and legs like a monkey raised his hand. You will take care of him. You will be able to defeat him along with the second group that has learned the intuition sword. Since he will be with the collaterals, bring the third group with you. Yes. Lastly, Keen looked at the girl with short green hair on his right. Karen, your opponent is Runan. She is an unpredictable one, but she seems to listen to Raon. You should stand by here, then follow my orders along with the 4th group. MHM. Finally, the 5th group and I will stay here and stop Raon. Holding the map, Keen Zighart straightened his spine. How are you going to find their locations? Nothing's going to work out if you fail to locate them. It's okay. He smiled confidently. Since I'll use that observing eye. The observing eye was a special ability that could perceive an enemy's location and presence from far away. It was the perfect skill to use in a local war like that. One-on-one was a different story, but in a local war like that, information and scouting was the most important aspect. He was confident that his scouting abilities were superior to Raon's, and even the instructors. It's time to display our willpower as people that have completed Hell Week. The best training ground of Zighart will be the 6th training ground from today onward. Wha! At Keen's powerful voice, the 6th training ground's trainees raised a battle cry. However, there was one thing they didn't realize. Keen, with his clenched fist, and the trainees with their burning passion alike. There were red eyes looking down on them from the top of the trees. Chapter 62. 30 minutes before the start of the battle. The 42 trainees from the 5th training ground, except for Raon, were gathered at the western foothold. I can't find Raon. Bayan frowned and turned his head. Runan, where's Raon? I don't know. Runan, who was sitting under a tree, turned her head sharply. It wasn't that she didn't care whether he was there or not. Her eyes were full of trust that he was going to come. TSK. Bayan clicked his tongue. He was nervous since the guy that needed to come and lead them wasn't there. Come around here for now. Get familiar with the geography for now until he arrives. Yes. Understood. Most of the trainees gathered around the map, but Martha was in a tree eating fruits, and Raon didn't move from her seat. You guys should look, at least. Over here is. Bayan explained the locations that the enemies could make a surprise attack or put them in danger. However, he didn't go over the map and the locations too seriously. Because we are going to win, regardless of what we do. Even though a few elites had joined the 6th training ground, they were still mostly the dropouts from the 5th training ground. The 5th training ground trainees had been training diligently so far, and they also had lots of sparring experience. There was no way they could lose. When the trainees got decently familiar with the geography and finished warming up, Raon came up to the foothold. Raon. The top trainee being late? Pathetic. Raon ran up to him first and Martha glared at him. What have you been doing instead of coming here earlier and making a plan? Bayan furrowed his brow while stomping on the ground, but Raon walked towards the flag's location without any reaction. You don't need to be so nervous. There's no way you can lose to the 6th training ground, right? Raon grinned, sitting on a tree's trunk. It somewhat looked like he was cheering them up, but he also sounded like he was laughing at them. Humph, well. That's actually true. Honestly, the opponents are too weak. We could wipe them out in one fell sweep if not for Sir Keen. However, the trainees didn't seem to have sensed that, and nodded with overflowing confidence. I'm glad you understand. Then you should do your best on your own. Are you telling us to just fight? Without any plan? You said you can win regardless. It would be unsightly to make a plan for such a thing. That's great. I like it. Martha jumped down in the middle of the slightly embarrassed trainees. You aren't gonna get your turn. I'm going to decimate them on my own, so just wait here. After saying that, she used her aura. Are you serious? Bayan furrowed his brows and stood next to Raon. But you think so as well. Bayan licked his lips, hearing Raon's question. He honestly wasn't wrong. Since the 6th training ground's defensive line was going to be obliterated if himself and Martha attacked from both sides while Raon and Raon held Keen back. You should also move with the collaterals following you. I'll leave the rest to you. What are you going to do? Since Keen might come for a surprise attack, I'll protect the flag here. I'm going to stay here as well. When Raon pointed at the red flag behind him, Raon sat down under the flag. Alright, you two should be enough. Bayan nodded and withdrew. He told the collaterals following him to head up with him. Let's go down, then. Those that dropped out from the temporary trainee test are a piece of cake. I guess. Do you think they've ever even held a real sword? The trainees from vassal families and the recommended children giggled, saying that they were heading down. Whistle. When everyone finished their preparations, the whistling sound coming from the top of the mountain signaled the start of the battle. The battle wasn't going to end until one of the flags was plucked out. Wait. As the trainees were about to run off, Raon's voice was heard. Everyone looked back. As the top trainee, I'll give you one last order. You can do whatever you want, but if I order you to retreat because of an unfavorable situation, you should return no matter what. I'm sorry, but that won't happen. Martha dashed to the center while breaking the ground. It's the same here. Let's go. Bayan also led the collaterals to climb up, and the recommended children and vassal family trainees ran down. Raon, can we win? Raon asked, tapping the flag. It's going to be difficult like that. Raon shook his head. He closed his eyes, watching the trainees run off in 3 directions. They will return after getting their asses hooped. Wham! Martha rushed to the front like a bull spotting a red cloth. I'll wipe them all out on my own. The other trainees weren't necessary. She could wipe out the weaklings from the 6th training ground on her own. After running for about 5 minutes and breaking through the dense bushes, 9 trainees entered her sight. The number 6 written on a leather armor showed that they were trainees from the 6th training ground. It's great to see you. Martha kicked off from the ground while licking her lip. She surrounded herself with Titan's aura midair and struck down with her fist. Slam! As the fist falling like a shooting star crushed the ground, the 6th training ground trainees scattered. Martha Zighart. The trainee with a big build in the center lifted his sword and called Martha's name. Are you the vanguard? After spinning her wrist, Martha drew her sword from her waist. Since it's annoying, come at me at once. I'm Dun Zighart. I'm a collateral. I don't need the name of a guy that's about to be defeated. The trainee that introduced himself as Dun wasn't taunted. With a calm expression, he held his sword at mid-height. You don't look too bad. Martha snickered and pounced at Dun, hacking at him. Slam! A thunderous noise resounded as the two swords clashed. Unlike Martha, who was standing her ground, Dun was pushed back 5 steps away with a trembling hand. Tisk! Martha clicked her tongue at seeing Dun get pushed back. I wanted to finish him in a single strike. Despite her intention of finishing him in a single strike, Dun had withstood her strike by being pushed back a few steps. He wasn't an opponent she could consider easy. But he's not a difficult opponent either. Martha strengthened her body using the Titan's aura. Her pressure soared rapidly. Ugh. Dun and the 6th training ground trainees groaned, facing the energy wave. Stop being annoying and just meet your end. With her eyes gleaming like black pearls, she sliced up with her sword. The tremendous energy erupted like a volcano from her sword. Third formation. Holding his sword at mid-height, Dun gave out an unknown instruction. The 4 trainees that had been staying back stepped up next to him and gathered their swords. Slum! Red flame burst out as Martha and the 5 people's swords clashed. Kook! Hold your ground. Under the powerful pressure, the trainees grit their teeth and didn't withdraw. A group of weaklings are still weak. Martha snorted and struck with her sword. Her blade was covered in an energy even stronger than before. Slam! Slam! Along with a ground-shattering noise, the trainees' bodies wavered. Ha! Kook! However, despite being pushed back, they didn't get knocked down. They kept holding out and groaning. Fine, let's see who wins. Martha bit her lip and kept striking with her sword. Second formation. Fifth formation. Dun kept defending against Martha's attacks by changing the defensive formation and the people. TSK. I'll deal with the other ones first. We've already prepared for something like that. Martha tried to attack a short-haired girl on the right side, avoiding Dun, who's standing in the center. However, Dun and the trainees smoothly rotated like clock hands and blocked her sword. Coo! Martha bit her lip. It was just like he'd said, they were prepared. As soon as she tried attacking another side, the trainees moved back and Dun came forward. It was impossible to penetrate the formation. Have they only been practicing blocking? Their defense was as solid as a rock, as if they'd only been practicing defense. Half-hearted attacks were only going to end up exhausting her aura. Ha! It's so annoying. Martha walked back a step and brought up the full power of Titan's aura. The sword in her hand vibrated fiercely and shone with a light yellow light. I admit that you're pretty decent. However, this is as far as you go. 10th formation. Dun didn't respond, shouting a number that he hadn't said yet. The 8 trainees all stuck to his back. Pointless. Martha dashed forward and poured out the Titan's aura, filling her sword vertically. Die. Hold your ground. At the same time that Dun shouted, the trainees' bodies shone in the same color. Bomb! A thunderous noise resounded throughout the mountain, and the earth and sand burst out from the ground like a fountain. Ha! In the midst of the rain of sand falling down, Martha's eyes widened. Did you withstand it? Dun and the trainees were breathing heavily and were pushed back significantly. However, they managed to take her full power without having a single drop person out. You crazy bastards! Ha! Martha kept striking with her sword, insanity gleaming in her eyes. Dun and the trainees faltered, but never let go of their swords. You bastards. You aren't the only protagonist of the world. What? We've been doing our best, sweating our blood. Don't think you are going to win easily. Martha snapped. Shut up. She kept swinging her sword while screaming. Despite using all of her remaining energy, she couldn't break through Dun's defense. Instead, it felt like his defense was getting more and more solid. Ugh, we kept practicing together in order to block your aura and swordsmanship. We are never going to lose as long as the sword formation remains. Sword formation. She was obviously aware that they had a sword formation, and that was exactly what she'd been trying to break through with power. But she didn't expect to be blocked to that extent. It's dangerous. Martha furrowed her brows, withdrawing her sword to her side. Her aura was dwindling because she used too much energy earlier. However, since the 9 of them were staying together, the 6th training grounds trainees were also recovering their aura faster. I need to buy some time. She didn't like that method, but she had no choice. She is running out of strength. Spread out. As she was trying to recover her aura by withdrawing a little, Dun dashed forward, holding his sword. His eyes were too sharp. You dare! Swinging the sword she was withdrawing, she hacked at Dun's head. Slam! Dun grit his teeth and withstood the shock. His hand was trembling, but he wasn't pushed back. Do it now! Following his instruction, the 4 trainees swung their swords from the top, bottom, left, and right. Tisk! Martha twisted her blade to deflect their swords, but the attacks kept coming in waves. There's no opening. Dun defended if she tried to attack them, and the rest started counterattacking afterward. The combination was unfolding like a cogwheel and was leaving her with no breathing room. Damn it! I can't lose here. She'd underestimated them too much. She'd thought they were just weaklings, and she didn't expect them to be prepared to this extent. Slam! Her sword, thrusting at their opening, was deflected by Dun once again. Ha! Martha breathed heavily, dodging the blades raining down on her. Damn it! Was it because she was in a pinch? She remembered what Raon told her. That they could win regardless. That bastard. He probably knew about it already. He must have been laughing at her, knowing that she was going to have so much difficulty. That's why I need to win this at all costs. Martha clenched her fist. She needed to put Raon in his place by breaking through somehow, but she couldn't find the way. Honestly, she felt like she was going to lose at the rate things were going. What shall I do? Are you thinking about something else during a battle? As she was wondering about how she could win, Dun, who'd only been defending so far, dashed at her like a bull. Wham! Martha was bounced back by a powerful body slam. Do it now! At Dun's instruction, the trainees thrust their swords at Martha, who couldn't regain her posture. Fine. Even if I get defeated here, I'll beat you guys up. As Martha held her sword upside down and was about to pounce at them like a beast, Silver Frost came up from the ground. This is. Runan came out from the bush with shining purple eyes. Why are you here? Raon is telling you to retreat. When Runan swung her sword in a half circle, the frost on the ground shimmered up like a haze. No. Order. I didn't lose ye. Order. Cook, damn it. Martha lowered her hand, seeing Runan's transparent eyes. She withdrew while biting her lip. After watching Dun and the trainees she'd separated using frost for a while, she followed Martha. The Martha ran away. We won. We really won. Wah! The trainees cheered, screaming that it was worth completing Hell Week. The 6th training ground trainees' cheers didn't only happen at the center. It was also heard from the top, where Ben went to, and the bottom, where the collaterals were headed. Thud! As the trainees were cheering in victory, Keen Sieghart jumped down from the tree. Sir Keen! Dun ran up to Keen, smiling brightly. Good job. Did the others also win? Yes. Just like we'd expected, Raon and Runan didn't move and we won in all 3 places. Wow. We really won. Ah, I can't believe it. The trainees hugged each other and smiled brightly. It's too early to rejoice. Keen raised his hand and the trainees stopped laughing. We can't be careless until we take the enemy's flag. His blue eyes shone like a starlight. Proceed according to the plan until the very end. Raon glanced at the 5th training ground trainees standing in front of him. They looked miserable, covered in soil mixed with their sweat. Their muscles were trembling and their eyes were filled with panic. They were the classic appearance of remnants that had lost their battle. Bayan and the collaterals that arrived later were the same. Bayan, who learned systematic swordsmanship, must have been stopped by the trainees that learned the intuition sword. He had been unable to do anything but get pushed back. How was it? Was it as easy as you expected? Nobody responded. Bayan bit his lip and Martha glared at him with a murderous look. The other trainees also stared at the ground, unable to respond. Shall I tell you what your mistake was? Raon's red eyes were distorted, like moonlight. You believe that the world is stagnant, and that you are the only ones that are changing. Since we've already won against them before, we should be able to win again. Since most of them dropped out of the exam, and they've been looked down upon by the Owen Kingdom, we are going to win no matter what. Isn't that what you were thinking? The trainees still couldn't respond, since it was just as he'd said. The world changes faster than you think. You might lose tomorrow to an opponent you won against today, and they might become a lot better than you the day after. However, Raon's voice went even lower. It was a frightening voice, as if it came up from deep underground. Did you say that you'd win no matter what, without even knowing your own place? Despite not knowing the enemy's strategy, did you dare think that you could win? Can you make them all kneel on your own? Forget about winning, you wasted all your aura and stamina, showed them your techniques while you were lost in your arrogance. Really amazing. Past Bayan and Martha, his gaze was directed at the trainees one by one. The trainees' bodies trembled. A lion does its best upon catching a rabbit. However, you aren't even lions. And they aren't rabbits. Those trainees are also swordsmen that have been training their swords every day in their life. You can't look down on them just because you are slightly ahead. Kook. Ugh. Bayan and the trainees lowered their heads. Their faces were completely red in embarrassment. Martha couldn't say anything either, her face wrinkling. Are we going to lose, then? Raon, who was standing back, stepped up next to him. We might, but we might not. The trainees raised their heads slowly at Raon's calm voice. We've already used too much stamina and aura, just like you said. 4 of us are already completely exhausted. This isn't a one-on-one spar, but a group battle. If you come to your senses even now, it's not too late to win. Really? I'll do anything if I can smash that boulder guy. Bayan and Martha clenched their fists so hard that they creaked. The trainee's eyes started to shine once again. Your eyes are still alive. Raon nodded, watching the heat shimmering in the trainee's eyes. Then I'll tell you how you'll win. Chapter 63. Why do you think you lost? The trainees couldn't answer Raon's quiet question. Might? Numbers? Decision-making? None of those are the right answer. It's true that they have the numbers, but we are superior in terms of might and combat experience. Such a one-sided defeat wasn't supposed to happen, yet it did. Why do you think you lost? Because of the information? Bayan slowly opened his mouth. That's correct. Raon nodded at Bayan. The 6th training ground fully understood the personalities and might of each of our members. They devised a strategy to counter each of us, using the Northern Grave Mountains geography. However, we didn't prepare anything, thinking that we were obviously going to win. But the time. We didn't have much time, but the same goes for them. Honestly, 1 day is enough time to obtain the minimum information necessary for the fight. That's why Instructor Rimmer purposefully informed us 1 day before, so that we could get some practice. Raon snorted, glancing at the trainees. And you didn't give up on it because you were out of time, but because you were too careless, thinking you could easily win. Lack of time isn't an excuse. Ugh. That's. The trainees couldn't refute that, so they just bit their lips. Even though the 5th training ground trainees are stronger than them individually, the difference isn't overwhelming. Losing to the 6th training ground, who was prepared, is a natural outcome. Then what shall we do? Isn't everything over? Nothing's over. Shut your mouth. Huff. Martha frowned and Dorian, hands trembling, zipped his mouth. Well, there were casualties, and we've lost a lot of stamina and aura. We are indeed at a disadvantage. However, Raon's eyes glowed, looking at the location where the 6th training grounds trainees must be preparing for their attack. They aren't the only ones that have information. Do you know anything about this? The top trainee of the 6th training ground, Keen Sieghart, is the one who has been giving the instructions. He was the one who sent people in that can counter you guys. Keen Sieghart? How did he do that? Martha ground her teeth. Keen Sieghart has an excellent sight and perception. He perceived the direction of your movement from afar and sent trainees that you'd have difficulties dealing with. Coup. Keen Sieghart. Bayan groaned at his pride being trampled. He sent swordsmen that were proficient in defense to Martha, who was straightforward with an excellent strength and endurance, in order to exhaust your aura. He sent swordsmen that have learned the intuition sword to Bayan, who uses honest and systematic swordsmanship, so that you couldn't do much against them. Raon told them precisely why the 5th training ground had lost. Then, how can we win? It's simple. We have to change our opponents. We would win without much difficulty if Bayan and Martha swapped their opponents. That won't do. I can't hold back my anger if we end up winning like that. I'm sorry, but the same goes for me. Winning by running away is meaningless for me. Martha, Bayan, and the collaterals all shut their mouths tightly. All right. Then here's the second solution. Raon nodded, as if he was expecting their reaction. We are going to attack differently. Attack differently? The sword formation that Martha faced was certainly solid, but the movement of their aura was sloppy. If you use your senses to strike where they couldn't move their aura in time, you can easily break through it. He faced away from Martha and looked at Bayan. Your systematic sword, which pursues perfection, is mere prey to the intuition sword. It is about swinging your sword without thinking, relying on your instincts. Bayan frowned and nodded his head. The intuition sword is a technique that relies on instincts, so they are easily tricked by fake movements. Use a feint and aim for the moment they take the bait. You should be able to do it. The trainees' eyes were so wide, they looked like they would pop out. How? You've been here all along. How did you know all that? How on earth? The way he'd grasped the situation was more astonishing than their defeat against the 6th training ground. What the hell are you? What kind of perception? Martha and Bayan's jaws also dropped in surprise. But what shall we do if they change their plans? Dorian raised his hand and asked his question. Since he was a coward, it seemed he also had lots of worries. That's a reasonable question, but their plans aren't going to change. Why? Because they've achieved victory once. The sweet taste of victory will make them repeat the same strategy to achieve an even more perfect victory. The hair on the back of the trainee's neck stood on its ends, facing Raon's confident gaze. But you said Keen's perception is excellent. What if he reacts quickly and comes to the center or the top as reinforcement? It's fine. My perception is better than Keen's. Feeling Keen's presence at the center, Raon smiled. And he is going to come over here. Metin frowned, upon arriving at the 5th training ground's foothold after checking the 6th training ground's trainees. He is an arrogant child. He was worried, because he'd heard how calm and composed Raon Sieghart was, but it seemed like he didn't need to worry. Saying that his perception is better than Keen's, that's just ridiculous. Keen Sieghart's strongest point wasn't his excellent swordsmanship nor his outstanding amount of aura. Perception. He had an excellent perception and sight that could read the opponent's presence and condition. He was even able to find the hiding instructor's locations, so it wasn't excessive to say that his perception wasn't at a trainee's level anymore. Yet Raon said his perception was better than Keen's. Honestly, he couldn't help snorting at him. It's going to be over soon. Considering Raon and the 5th Training Ground's attitude, it looked like they could achieve victory a lot easier than he'd expected. I should prepare a feast for the children. The winners should be rewarded. Metin was about to head back, thinking about the feast the 6th Training Ground was going to have to celebrate their victory. Aren't you the arrogant one? A cheerful voice, carried by the wind, came from behind him. Metin calmly turned around. A red-haired elf was giving off a sly smile. Did you just arrive? No, I've been spectating for a while now. You always give excuses after being late. I told you that's not true. Metin frowned, hearing Rimmer's light voice. But what did you mean by that just now? Just now? You told me I was arrogant. Ah, about that. Rimmer scratched his neck and snickered. Our side didn't even draw our sword yet, and you're considering the fight over, so arrogant is the best way to describe you. You haven't even drawn your sword, huh? You fought us head-on and were already defeated. You are way more exhausted than us, in stamina and aura alike. It's just hopeless. That's what you think. You are just like that child. You guys are just bluffing. Metin shook his head, looking back and forth between Rimmer and Raon, who was giving instructions to the trainees. Keen's perception is good enough to find the instructor's presence. There's no trainee in this small battlefield that can strategize better than him. He won't be able to locate anyone, he'll just end up losing like this. Finding the instructor's presence, huh? Rimmer grinned and didn't finish his sentence. Raon has already located my presence before, not just the other instructors. What? The Raon Sieghart you underestimated because you considered him arrogant has found where I was hiding before. That's a lie. Metin's eyes wavered for the first time. That doesn't make any sense. Rimmer was an elf, despite injuring his energy center. It was difficult even for Metin himself to find him if he hid his presence, so he couldn't believe that such a young trainee could sense him. I don't lie. Bullshit. I'm pretty sure you lie more than 50% of the time. Let me correct myself. I don't lie about those children. Rimmer nodded and grinned. Metin gulped and watched underneath. Even if Raon Sieghart has a better perception than Keen, just like you said, it's already too late. The victory is already decided. Well, it does certainly look difficult, since 4 people have been eliminated and they are mostly out of strength. However, Raon has never disappointed me, not once. Rimmer grinned, watching Raon giving out instructions to the trainees. If your students are as careless as you right now, they will get wiped out in a blink of an eye. The 6th Training Ground trainees that had tasted victory were gathered in a circle just like in the morning, and Keen was at the center with the map of the Northern Grave Mountain. The 5th Training Ground's flag is located here. Keen pointed to the western end with his finger. It will be over once we attack there. It was worth all the effort, since we are actually about to win against the 5th Training Ground. Everyone's going to look at us differently after this. The trainee smiled as if the battle was already over. I told you it's too early to rejoice. Keen stomped the ground to gather the trainees' attention. Raon Sieghart and Runan Sullian are at full strength. Raon is particularly problematic since he is the strongest guy in the 5th Training Ground. We will lose if we are careless. But Bian and Martha have already exhausted most of their strength, and 4 of their trainees have been eliminated. We are at an advantage, indeed. But I'm telling you to stop being careless. We will easily win if Sir Keen grasps their situation and instructs us just like before. Yes, we are counting on you. Well, that's true, but... Keen nodded slightly. He was pretending to be composed, but his immaturity was showing. Anyway, you can't be careless. Do your best until the end. Understood. The trainees responded loud and clear, then stood up. There are 2 potential ways they are going to move from here on. Keen, who was pointing his finger at the map, started glaring to the west. They're coming. Pardon? The 5th Training Ground trainees have started moving once again. How? Keen closed his eyes without responding. Feeling the approaching trainee's presence by opening his perception, he smiled lightly. It's the same as before. Martha at the center, Bayan at the top and the rest are at the bottom. They still haven't learned. If they want to lose, then we are going to make them lose. I guess even Raon can't control Bayan and Martha. It's already over. The trainees laughed at the 5th training grounds trainees, who were running at them like fireflies. We are going to use the same strategy. Decal will face Bayan Sieghart alongside the 2nd and 3rd groups, Dun will face Martha with the 1st group, and Pwyon will head to the bottom. Karen and I will stand by in preparation for Raon and Runan. Understood. The 6th training ground trainees answered loudly, then ran off to defeat their assigned opponents. Let's prepare to finish this. Keen glanced back as he stood up. Karen drew her sword, nodding at him. Then which side is the first? He frowned, looking towards the bottom. Runan also moved this time. He could feel the presence of frost from the bottom. Runan's Sullian was there. Karen. Leave it to me. Karen nodded and ran towards the location Runan was headed. Karen should be able to stop her. Karen was a successor of a high-rank vassal family just like Runan. Since she knew Runan better than anyone, she wouldn't be easily defeated. Wham! Whack! The crashing sound of boulders could be heard from the center. It was the sound of Martha clashing against Dun once again. Bang! Shortly after that, the sound of Bayan clashing with Decal could also be heard. Let's see. With 2 people standing guard, Keen closed his eyes and widened his perception. Since he needed to send reinforcement if any side was getting pushed back, he scattered his aura at the top center and bottom to grasp the situation. Ha! After checking all 3 sides, Keen's eyes widened. How? Why are they all losing? Top, center, and bottom were all being pushed back by the 5th training ground. How is this happening? Even though they were facing the same opponent as in the morning, they were now losing one-sidedly. It was unbelievable. Raon Sieghart. What have you done? Chapter 64. Martha Sieghart was thinking about Raon's instruction as she ran ahead. You aren't good at dealing with the defensive sword formation. It's best to change your opponent. I'll never do that. She swore immediately as he told her to run away from her opponents. Raon wasn't surprised, nodding as if he knew she would say that. Then I'll give you different instructions. Break the sword formation. The sword formation? The opponent's sword formation isn't perfect. No, it can't be perfect since they are just trainees. In what way are they not perfect? They stopped you by gathering 9 people's auras together. Which means that the aura has moved within the sword formation. Which means... That's right. If you aim for that moment, you can break the sword formation in your current state, even when you've already spent a lot of your aura. Chills ran down her spine upon hearing that. What is that guy? Despite having just been sitting there, he noticed the enemy's weaknesses and told her how to defeat them. He really looked like a monster. Rather than weakness, I want to win against them head-on. Since she didn't want to get overwhelmed by Raon's words, she spoke without thinking. Yes. You can win against them after recovering your strength and aura, since you are outstanding. However, do you think you can do it right now? She obviously wasn't able to respond. She couldn't imagine herself winning against those high-stamina monsters in her current exhausted state. Like I said, this isn't a one-on-one spar, but a team competition. Make your choice right now. Are you to choose your pride, resulting in an uncertain victory, or are you going to choose the team's victory? Martha stood up in silence upon hearing that. I would have ignored something like that before. Her arrogant self from before she lost to Raon would have kept fighting no matter what he told her. However, she'd already experienced defeat once, and she could experience it a second time now. It was better to win no matter what, rather than losing. His name was Dun. She could see the Dun guy that she'd fought before from afar. His rock-solid pressure was the same as before. She wanted to break through it with her fist, but she held herself back by gritting her teeth. Did you come back despite knowing that you can't win against us? How stupid. You'll get hurt if you just say whatever you want. Just like me, before. Martha kicked off from the ground and dashed towards Dun. Fourth formation. The trainees from behind came up next to him and gathered their aura. Humph. Instead of striking the sword that she raised upwards, she spread her perception. She could feel the 6th training ground trainee's aura gathering around Dun. It's really slow. It was just like Raon had said. Since they were dealing with a large amount of aura, the movement was as slow as a snail. Humph. Martha inhaled heavily and turned to the right. Pointless. Dun turned around and stood in front of her. It was the same development as before, but there was a difference. Martha, who used to brainlessly swing her sword, pummeled her sword down at Dun's right flank, where the aura wasn't gathered yet. Wham! The two swords clashed, creating a powerful wave. Martha was pushed back by the impact, but Dun and the trainee's sword formation that used to be as solid as a deep-rooted tree also wavered significantly. Coo! Coo! Dun and the trainees groaned, then fixed the wavering sword formation. Martha's eyes shone like black pearls. He was right. It was just like Raon had said. The place that the aura hadn't gathered yet had a significantly weaker defense than the other places. This really was a breakthrough. Martha smirked. Was it because the breakthrough was too easy? It wasn't. Raon Zieghart had noticed the sword formation's weakness, sitting at the foothold with the flag. It was because she was frightened by his monstrosity. Don't be arrogant just because you've come out ahead once. Once? Stop making me laugh. It's every time from now on. Martha pounced with a battle cry. She moved to the left while pretending to attack, then she swung her sword towards Dun's lower body, where the aura didn't move in time. Wham! Dun quickly swung his sword in response, but his upper body wavered significantly and the trainees in the sword formation bounced out of formation. It's over now. Emanating a beast-like pressure, Martha pounced at Dun. Bayan spun the wrist holding his sword and raised his head. Decal, who was one of the best collateral trainees, was glaring fiercely at him. I lost against him before. Decal and the 7 trainees attacked him at once, and since they'd used the intuition sword that countered his swordsmanship, he couldn't find any way of winning. The other guys couldn't help him either because of the difference in numbers, so he kept getting pushed back. They weren't lying when they said they had thoroughly planned in preparation to defeat the 5th training ground. I'm not going to lose like before. Retreating once was enough. He was going to beat them all up, even if he had to collapse as a result. For the famous Bayan Zieghart to run away, I guess numbers really do decide the battle. Decal grinned. Please, fight us until the end like a real swordsman this time. At his signal, the trainees behind him rushed at him like a plague of rats. Ha! Decal himself penetrated at the center, swinging his sword. The 8 people's swords weren't in harmony, but every single one of them were aimed at a weakness. Huff! Bayan gathered his aura to use his footwork. Moving to the side like flowing water, he used the phenomenal sword. His sword was bent towards Decal on his right side. Do it now! Attack him at once! The moment Bayan started his attack, the trainees that learned the intuition sword rushed at him. However, that was a trap laid down by Bayan. Wham! The training sword that was aimed at Decal curved like a crescent moon and hit the wrists and chests of the trainees that were coming at him. Coo! Arg! In the blink of an eye, 2 trainees were rolling on the ground, grabbing their wrists and chests. Their conditions were so bad, it was safe to consider them eliminated. Humph, humph. Bayan didn't stop swinging his sword. Using the river footwork, he kept moving and swung the phenomenal sword. Because his large motion used his entire shoulder, the 3 trainees instinctively counterattacked, aiming for that opening. Get baited. Bayan's blue eyes sparkled. Bending his elbow naturally, he stuck the incoming trainee's chest without reservation. Whack! 3 trainees were sent away flying in a single strike. Coo! Ugh! The one that was hit at the end managed to stand back up, but the other 2 had already fainted. Damn it! Decal chased him, but it was too late since Bayan had already stepped aside. What happened? Why are you suddenly mixing in feints? That's what I'm saying. Bayan frowned. How can it change this much from just mixing in feints? Intuition Sword was a swordsmanship that relied on instinct instead of being systematic. The trainees that were still immature had no choice but to splash around, baited by the feints. But how did he even realize that? He was certain Raon didn't move from that place. The perception and knowledge of the guy that observed the entire situation from his seat gave him goosebumps. Martha must be feeling the same way right now. He was sure that Martha, who was fighting further down, must have been thinking the same thing. He's like an onion. Raon showed him another side of himself just when he thought he finally understood him. Just like an onion, new layers kept coming out upon peeling him open. It's not over yet. Haa. Deccan dashed at him, gritting his teeth. The 3 other trainees did the same. Whoosh! Bian thrust his sword forward. It was a powerful strike, multiple openings could be seen in his big motion. It's a feint. Don't pay attention to it. Ha! Decal's eyes were wide. He was planning to ignore it, but the trajectory of Bian's sword didn't change. It's a real one this time. And no way. He tried to defend against it, but it was already too late. Wham! Taking the powerful strike, Decal's training sword broke and his body was sent back flying. The fight is already over. Looking at the remaining trainees, Bian's eyes glowed. It's our victory. As long as that monster existed, there was no way the 5th training ground could lose. What is this? Metten's eyes were about to pop out of his head as he watched the 6th training ground trainees lose at the same time. What is happening? He could understand one side starting to lose. However, top, center, and bottom were all being pushed back at the same time against the opponents they'd won against. I told you already, the battle isn't over yet. Rimmer, who was lying down next to him, murmured provokingly while yawning. You must have done something. I didn't do anything, but Raon did. What? Before you came to watch, Raon gave them advice. And that worked. Are you saying a mere trainee's advice changed the situation this much? It's because he's not a mere trainee. He's Raon. Rimmer smirked and pointed at Raon, who was protecting the flag on his own. Some trainees don't follow him, and some dislike him. However, they all trust his power in decision-making. I think they'll start following his words like a god's voice. Metten groaned. That meant he was trusted by the others. However, rather than the fact that he was trusted, the way his advice significantly changed the tide of the battle was more surprising. What was the advice? Are you curious? If you are, then give me the gold. Ah, all right. Rimmer waved his hand, noticing Metten's stiffened expression. Firstly, about the top. He told Metten about the advice Raon gave the trainees. That's crazy. Metten's fingers trembled. How can a trainee give such advice? It was a perfect walkthrough, without a single flaw. However, what was more surprising was the fact that he'd noticed all those weaknesses by only using his perception. Rimmer was correct. The arrogant one wasn't Raon, but himself. He deserved the praise of having a better perception than Keen. However, watching Keen, who had started his move, Metten smiled confidently. The match isn't over yet. Raon, who was sitting under the flag, opened his eyes. They are all doing pretty well. While hiding his presence, he released his fully open perception in order to observe the status of the battle. He smiled. Bian, who managed to defeat Decal, stormed through the trainees that had learned the intuition sword, and Martha was beating up the remaining trainees after breaking through the sword formation. And Runan. She was having an icy competition against the 6th training ground's better trainee, who came out to be her opponent. Well, it doesn't matter. Since it looked like she wasn't going to lose, it was going to be fine. Well, then. Raon stood up. As he warmed himself up, the bushes swayed and a blonde, blue-eyed swordsman appeared. Keen Zighart. The 6th training ground's top trainee, and the member of the direct line that was 2 years older than him, had appeared. I knew it. Since they were losing in every direction, and Raon himself was hiding his presence, there was only one thing he could do. Seize the opponent's flag. So you were here, Raon Zighart. Keen bit his lip. He didn't look surprised, as he must have been expecting it. I didn't expect you to cast magic on the trainees. I heard you weren't acknowledged by them, but it must have been a false rumor. He slowly drew his sword from around his waist. However, this is the end. The end? I heard your aura has a fire attribute. As he said that, a crimson flame flared up on his blade. Unfortunately, my aura is the highest tier fire attribute aura, and I have more aura than a regular swordsman. In this matchup, you can't win against me. Matchup, huh? Raon smirked and unsheathed his sword. The energy from the 10,000 flames cultivation created a red flower as it heated up the blade. Whirr! It was a lot smaller than the fire on Keen's sword, but the color was incomparably denser. People from this house really talk a lot before fighting. Raon declared, eyes the same color as the flame. Come at me. I'll show you how a single flower of flame can engulf your fire. Chapter 65. Metin furrowed his brow, watching Raon as he hid his presence like a wild animal. Has Raon been hiding his strength on purpose? He wasn't hiding it, but he did that to teach the other guys a lesson. Rimmer snorted. Teach them a lesson? After receiving some attention, my students started getting delusional, thinking that they were actually really strong. They arrogantly believe that they are always ahead of the others, without realizing that there are plenty of people as strong as them. He smirked and pointed at Raon. The only person who judges his own abilities objectively in the 5th training ground is Raon. That's why I wanted to teach them a lesson. Wait. No way, were you actually in that pub because... Yes. I went to the pub you frequent on purpose. I wanted to make the 5th and 6th training ground fight each other by taunting you. Rimmer. Don't look at me like that. You were aiming for us as well. Rimmer turned around to look at Metin, smiling softly. I've been watching the way you've been teaching them well, and the children's wholehearted efforts. No one is going to look down on you in the future. Metin frowned and turned his head. It seemed he liked the compliment since his cheeks had become slightly red. But Rimmer, you are also mistaken about one thing. He turned his face back, with vivid eyes. Mistaken? What kind of mistake? The battle isn't over yet. Metin raised his hand and pointed at Raon, who was standing in front of Keen. The Raon's aura is a mid-high level fire attribute cultivation technique, which isn't anything special. However, Keen is born with the fire attribute's disposition, and has acquired a highest tier cultivation technique. Raon is unable to win against Keen in this matchup. As Metin finished speaking, a crimson flame flared up on Keen's blade. This is another mistake. It's fine as long as you realize. The result? No, it wasn't about me, but you. Rimmer giggled. He turned his head and pointed at Raon, who was drawing his sword. Whap! A very small flame ignited on Raon's blade. Open your eyes and watch. Rimmer's eyes were burning red, much like the flame ignited on Raon's blade. How the small flame will engulf the bigger flame. Keen Sieghart furrowed his brow, watching the small flame ignited on Raon's blade. It was as beautiful as a flower, but it was too small. It's small. The small flame could barely cover the end of the blade. It was too thin to cut through anyone. But there must be something about him. He couldn't have become the top trainee by playing hopscotch. Considering which opponents Raon had faced and won against so far, that energy must have been extraordinary. But I'm stronger. He kept cultivating his aura nonstop for 2 years after getting injured. Swordsmanship would have been a different story, but he didn't lose to the regular swordsman in terms of the aura's quantity. Moreover, since he'd acquired the highest tier fire attribute aura and could use it to engulf Raon's flame, the match was already decided. Unless he was taken off guard, he could obtain victory, reversing the unfavorable situation. Here I go. Keen brandished his sword and kicked off from the ground. I need to break through it with power. Raon was famous for his talent in swordsmanship. In order to avoid getting dragged around by his techniques, he needed to finish the fight in one fell swoop using speed and power. Ha! Right before he pummeled Raon's shoulder with his flame sword, he raised his head. Ha! Serene eyes. He got goosebumps as he looked at eyes that didn't match the situation at all. He brandished the sword containing that small flame. It's too late. Putting strength into his waist and thigh, he completed his attack. Clang! The moment the two swords clashed, he fueled up his aura to full power. Wham! The flame rising from the blade was burning fiercely, as if it was going to engulf Raon as a whole. However, something unexpected happened. TSSSK. The small flame at the end of Raon's sword started engulfing the huge flame covering Keen's blade. What is happening? Keen's eyes widened. How does this make any sense? Such a small flame was engulfing his flame, when it should have been the other way around. It was unbelievable. He met Raon's eyes over the sword. His eyes were even calmer than before. He still had a lot of room to spare. Arf! Keen grit his teeth. Using all his energy from his energy center, he sliced with his sword. The aura exploded fiercely, to a point where a red line was drawn in the air, but Raon stepped up instead. Whir! His sword was changing from a heavy boulder to a sharp wind. The silver blade was penetrating him like a beast's fang. Huff! Keen hurriedly used his aura to slash his sword. Clank! I blocked it. I certainly blocked it, yet what is my sword? It was a single strike. In a single strike, the training sword shattered. He couldn't believe such a small flame contained such a tremendous amount of power. It's not over yet. The sound of wind could be heard once again, and his back was hurting as if it was being crushed. Kook! Unable to withstand Raon's punch, Keen was struck to the ground while screaming. Koo! As he was standing back up and enduring the pain of his ribs being crushed, he heard Raon's voice from above him. Matchup? Raon tilted his head with an innocent expression. What's a matchup? After beating down Keen, Raon sat on the tree trunk once again. After waiting a while, the 5th training ground trainees showed up through the bushes. Some of them had fallen, but most of them had returned nice and healthy. Martha was holding the enemy's flag. That thing, isn't that person Keen Zighart? Dorian was looking at Keen, whose hands were tied up, with soulless eyes. That's right. When the battle started going badly, he came here immediately. Wow, the young master really never loses. A few trainees, including Dorian, smirked. They were saying that he was amazing. It was just like you said. Baen approached him with an awkward expression. The incomplete intuition sword was easily tricked by the feints, so much that it was ridiculous. He scratched his head, then breathed out slowly and started talking again. I believed I could do better than you as a commander at least, but that wasn't the case at all. If you weren't here today, we would have lost to the 6th training ground. The trainees behind Baen nodded in agreement. I acknowledge you as the top trainee once again. I'll follow your orders from now on without any complaint. He thumped his chest and turned around. His ears turned completely red, showing that he was embarrassed once again. Stab! Martha stuck the 6th training ground's flag into the ground. I don't really like it, but he's right. I hate to say it, but the best contributor in today's victory is you. She said that if his instruction ended up being weird, then she was going to give up on that promise. Raon. Runan, who came back in a better shape than anyone, nodding strongly, as if she was telling him good job. It was her way of complimenting him. Looking at those 3 people, one after another, Raon smiled lightly. This is how the 5th training ground should be. Ha! Metten smiled bitterly. His gaze was fixated on Raon, who made Keen kneel after beating him up. I didn't expect that small flame to be that strong. Raon's small flame didn't lose to Keen's large flame. Instead, it was overwhelming in terms of ferocity. Rimmer wasn't talking nonsense when he said it was going to engulf the other. It's not just the power, he was also watching his opponent properly. Keen's flame was certainly strong, but there was a gap at the bottom of the blade where he couldn't cover it with aura. It was a small gap that was difficult to notice for a trainee. However, he'd noticed it. Raon Zighart had noticed Keen's mistake and swung his sword at that weakness to grasp his victory. Amazing. He thought Keen's perception was amazing, but Raon's was even better. His perception was so sensitive and polished, to the point that it was still difficult to believe despite having witnessed it. He's insanely gusty, too. Analyzing the enemy's weakness and swinging his sword in a spur of the moment wasn't something just anyone could do. His mind was already on par with qualified swordsmen. Ha! Metin sighed and stood up. He turned around and nodded. I have no choice but to acknowledge him. He. Rimmer, who was half lying down, nodded in satisfaction. I complimented that boy, but why do you look so satisfied? Because he's my student. What about it? He must have been training on his own while you were playing around. Well, something like that did happen before. Rimmer snickered and got up. Then let's go. Where? They think of each other as rivals, but they don't antagonize or hate each other. Since they are all under Sieghart's name, this is a good opportunity to get acquainted to each other. Let's give them a feast. That's a good idea. You are paying for it, right? All right. Metin nodded. Since he made a bet with Rimmer, paying for the children's food wasn't a big deal. I knew you were a generous guy. Rimmer smiled and ran towards the trainees gathering around Raon. We are going to feast with someone else's money. Raon took his fork and knife, watching the food piling up on the long rectangular table. He cut the grilled pork in front of him into a small slice and put it in his mouth. The skin was crispy, the meat was moist, and it melted in his mouth. The taste was strong, but extremely delicious. Wow! This is so good. I love it. It's a condensed flavor that captures the King of Essence's picky taste. I agree, it's pretty good. Try eating the pie over there next. Ever since Devil Dom, the King of Essence has loved pies. Every morning and evening. Raon ignored him and ate the stew on his right side. It was soft and tasty. This isn't bad either, but listen to the King of Essence. Pie. It's a pie. Such a place existed around here. As soon as the battle ended, Rimmer had brought the trainees from the 5th and 6th training grounds to a restaurant inside the domain. He was worried because the restaurant's exterior looked old, but the dishes were varied, and the taste was great. It seemed an excellent chef had cooked using quality ingredients. And yet, he looked around while eating another slice of pork. The atmosphere was as lethargic as an old piano wire. The 5th training ground, who came out victorious, and the 6th training ground, who had lost, were both depressed. I guess it can't be helped. The 5th training ground almost lost to the 6th training ground that they believed they could easily win against, and the 6th training ground had lost despite having prepared thoroughly. Both parties being depressed wasn't anything strange. Of course, that wasn't the case for everyone. I'm realizing once again that I really taught them very well. Rimmer giggled while drinking the most expensive black beer. Giving out that advice was great, but did you see how they followed that advice? My students are really amazing. You didn't do anything today. Who do you think taught Raon? It was me. Therefore, his achievements are also mine. Ha! The two of them were having a reflection meeting on the battle. Although, it didn't sound like a reflection meeting. Rimmer was just boasting, instead. On the other hand, the sound of eating was the only thing that could be heard from the trainees' table, just like a lunch after training. Thinking that it couldn't be helped, he was about to eat his fried chicken. Was his name done? The big guy that fought against Martha at the center came up to her. You were stronger than I heard. Your attack and defense were both great. You were amazing at the first encounter, but I was really freaked out when you started aiming for the sword formations gap on the second encounter. Just like his honest appearance, Dunn told her how he felt. Martha seemed flustered, as she dropped the broccoli from her fork. Won't you train with me one day? I'm sure it will be helpful for both of you. Scram! Of course, Martha shook her hand without even looking at him. I guess she isn't going to start rampaging at this rate. Raon secretly nodded. Martha would have normally started punching him already, but the way she answered signified that she took a liking to him. Sir Bayan. Decal also moved next to Bayan, seizing the opportunity. Do you have anything to say? Bayan frowned and raised his head. Do you usually practice feints? Not that much. They looked like very polished feints to me. They looked so real that I couldn't give up on the opportunity. I ended up going for it like a dog on a bone. Ahem. Bayan's face went slightly red. It seemed that he liked the compliment. Well, your intuition sword was also pretty sharp. I couldn't find any way to break through it until I started using the feints. It was the first time my swordsmanship was countered so hard. Bayan complimented Dekan in return. But we still lost to Sir Bayan in the end. We really couldn't do anything once you started using the feints at the end. Well, the swordsmanship is one thing, but my aura is better than yours, so... It seemed Bayan took a liking to Decal's honesty. He was even turned around, talking about swordsmanship and aura. With that as the trigger, the trainees that had been reading the atmosphere started to talk about the battle, visiting the ones they'd faced. They discussed which parts were amazing, and which parts were troublesome, as if they were having a debate. I heard you like ice cream. MHM. Which ice cream? Deed. Runan was also sitting in front of a cute-looking girl. Whether they were having a proper conversation was questionable. Heave-ho. He could hear somebody sitting next to him. When he looked next to him, it was the 6th Training Ground's top trainee, Keen Sieghart, that he fought against at the end. It was my complete defeat. I didn't expect you to break my sword by attacking the spot where my aura was weak. He nodded his head, face full of admiration. I'm guessing it wasn't a coincidence, right? That is correct, sir. Raon nodded honestly. You don't need to talk so formally. We are both trainees, after all. Okay. He didn't need to refuse if he wanted him to talk casually, so he nodded. I believed I was the best at my age in terms of perception, but apparently that was my arrogance. Keen smiled, with the expression of having accepted everything. It was different than before. Meeting a member of the direct line with such a personality was rather refreshing. That was a great lesson for me, both tactically and mentally. Thank you. A lesson? Thanks to you, I learned that I shouldn't be careless until the very end, and that I need to prepare for the plan's failure. You probably told me all that in order to teach me a lesson. Keen stood up and slowly lowered his head. You are my benefactor. Thank you. Raon tilted his head. What is he even saying?